Readers can expect slice of life, darkness, slice of life, comedy, slice of life, action, character focus, and tons of world building on multiple worlds. I like danger and also alien beverage etiquette. This story is about a person growing up and finding his place in a universe with systems, superheroes, and alien wizards. Super supportive would be very, very long. The burn will be slow, and, I hope, better for it. Everyone wants superpowers, including Alden Thorne. But even if he's lucky enough to be one of the few humans granted magical abilities by the extraterrestrial system that's been running things on Earth for decades, his goal of being a battlefield support hero is still a long way off. He's got determination on his side and maybe a murderous alien desk clerk, too. The universe is a complicated place. Alden's about to meet it. I started writing this because I wanted to read a character-oriented superhero origin story every step of the way from the very beginning. And I also wanted to write as thoughtfully as I could about a system and aliens. It's grown from my initial idea, and it continues to grow. If you decide to come along for the ride, thank you. I'm having a lot of fun here. I hope you will, too. Chapter 1. He woke to the taste of blood in the agony of a sharp, terrifying pain. His ears rang. His head pounded. His bare chest was pressed to the carpet his parents had installed in their new apartment just a week ago. It still smelled funny. Gluey and artificial. "Daddy!" he screamed. "Mama!" Blood fell from his mouth onto the carpet. One of his arms was caught under his body, and he couldn't move it. Something had pierced the side of his stomach. It hurt. It hurt so much. He called again for his parents. But his own voice sounded weird. Distant. On the floor all around him, shards of glass sparkled in the orange glow of his nightlight. There was wind in the room. The window must have broken, but he couldn't see it from here. He looked around as best he could and spotted Wummy, plump and smiling, lying beside him. The stuffed wombat was half hidden by a comforter that had spilled over the side of the bed. Sobbing, he reached for Wummy with his good arm and grabbed him by the ear. Beneath them, the building shook. A fire alarm began to shriek. Suddenly, there was a deep thum of sound. The boy felt an awful pain in his ears as the world exploded around him. Someone, blasted through the exterior wall of his bedroom. The ceiling crumbled. Chunks of concrete flew through the air like cannonballs. With his face pressed to the floor, the boy didn't see any of it. But he felt small pieces of rubble hitting his back. Then, he felt a crushing, smothering weight as the mattress from his bed landed on top of him. Pain from whatever was stabbing into his side shot through him, making every muscle spasm. He screamed as loud as he could. In response, he heard nothing but a terrible rushing noise and an endless high-pitched whine. Something heavy landed on the mattress. The air was pressed from his lungs. He couldn't breathe. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Help." Dying was painful. It was dark. He wanted his mother. He wanted #, light. The boy didn't know what had happened. Maybe he had passed out. Maybe he'd been struck on the head, and his memories were having a hard time sticking. The only thing he knew for sure was that he was awake now, and there was light all around him. A semi-transparent globe of it encased him, glittering like a bubble full of silver stars. He was suspended inside the bubble, his body frozen. He tried to twitch his fingers or turn his head. But his mind was the only part of him that could still move, and it seemed to be moving more sluggishly than it should. There was no pain. He couldn't even blink, but his eyes didn't feel dry. He and the bubble slowly spun in place. And that place was... where was he? There was so much wreckage in the room that he only gradually recognized it as his own. A gaping hole in the wall looked out onto the ruin of a building. The night was full of smoke, dust, and flashes of red and white light. Fire truck lights, he thought. There was a station near their apartment. He loved to watch the trucks pass by on the street below. "It is exciting, bud," his father always said. "But remember to say a prayer for the people they're going to help." His father was a pastor. His mother had just gotten a job as a nurse in the Artonan House of Healing. The son of a pastor and a consecrated nurse was supposed to say prayers for all kinds of things. It was important, but sometimes he forgot. Dear God, he thought now, as the bubble slowly rotated. I think something bad is happening. Please keep me and my family and Wummy safe. Please be with the firemen and don't let them get burned. Please take care of the people the firemen are going to help. Amen. Next, an Ortonan word chain to call good fortune from other worlds. He only knew a few of them, and he only knew them in English. Most people said that was useless, but his mother's boss said no faithful intention went completely unrewarded. My heart calls out to another in good faith. Spare me your luck under tonight's moons, and tomorrow I will spare you an equal portion of mine. Frozen in place as he was, he couldn't make the accompanying hand gesture. Hopefully it would still help. As his bubble continued to spin, more of the broken world around him came into view. He could see through one of his bedroom walls into the apartment's main living area. There was a band of destruction through the center of the room. The wood flooring was ripped up and splintered. The sofa was turned on its side beside the breakfast counter that separated the kitchen from the den. The coffee table was missing. The front door was missing, too, along with part of the surrounding wall. Through the gap, he could see the hall. Dim emergency light strips near the ceiling illuminated a neighbor's door. Dark liquid was spattered across the pale paint and the shiny brass number plate. The boy knew something was very wrong. He remembered his own terror. But his fear was almost as muffled as his pain now, and he felt only curiosity and a faint unease as more and more of the disaster was revealed. There were strange people in his room. 2 of them. No. 3. They were against the wall, beside the small bookcase he and his mother had decorated with animal stickers on the day they moved in. First, he noticed their clothes. The woman, her brown hair braided around her head like a crown, wore combat boots and what looked like a blue motorcycle jacket that sparkled with the unmistakable glitter of real magic. She crouched beside a seated man with black hair and a sculpted beard. He was dressed in an armored bodysuit in the same shade of dark blue. No visible magic sparkled over him, but a sigil was emblazoned into the suit's chest. They are superheroes, thought the boy. Real ones. Excitement stirred inside him for the briefest instant before stilling. The man was weeping and shaking his head, staring down at the palms of his trembling hands as if they didn't belong to him. The woman reached out toward him, biting her lip. He jerked away. On the floor at their feet, the third stranger lay still. He was a teenager, the boy thought, though it was hard to tell in flashing lights. He wore a black hoodie, and his pale face stared up at the ceiling, unblinking. Is he frozen like me? But no. The person in the hoodie wasn't inside a silvery bubble. He was sprawled across the carpet, and as more of his body came into view, the boy saw that it had been ripped nearly in half. Horror rose, filling him, only to drain away as if someone had pulled a plug. The man gestured toward the dead body, his face agonized. His mouth opened wide, as if he were shouting. But inside the bubble, there was no sound. The woman looked toward the body, too. Her face was serious and sad. She reached over and gently shut the dead boy's eyes. She closed her own and said something. Maybe she's praying, too. Then, she stood. As she did, she glanced up and looked at the boy in the bubble. Their eyes met. She seemed startled and upset for a moment before taking a deep breath and hurrying toward him, smiling broadly. It's a fake smile, he thought. It was the smile adults used when they were trying to convince you that something wasn't as bad as it really was. The one they wore before they gave you shots at the doctor's office. The smiling woman positioned herself between him and the dead body, then she pulled a small pad of paper and a marker out of her jacket. She wrote something and held it up for him to read. The print was clear and large. Don't be afraid. We are here to help you. She gave him plenty of time to read it, then she wrote on a new page. My name is Hannah. My friend is Arjun. He was faintly disappointed they had real names. Lots of superheroes used code names but not all of them. I will cover your bubble. Then we will take you to a safe place. My name's Alden, he thought. What place? Where are my parents? Will they be there? but he had no way of speaking. Hannah gave Alden another strange smile and a thumbs up. Then, she bent down to the floor. She popped back up a moment later holding Wummy. She unzipped her jacket part way and made a show of carefully tucking the wombat inside before zipping it back up so that his smiling face peeked out just under her chin. She gave the bubble another thumbs up. Alden caught a glimpse of Arjun and the nameless dead boy as she bent again. The superhero's face was hidden by one shaking hand. Then a blanket, Alden's own comforter, stained with blood, was tossed over the whole silver bubble. And he couldn't see anything anymore. Chapter 2 2 weeks later. Alden lay in his hospital bed, watching rain spatter against the windows and stream down the glass in rivulets. Wummy lay beside him, and a handheld video game console was in his lap, chirping occasionally to remind him that he'd left his game on pause. He winced and shut it off. The chirp was too similar to the high-pitched ringing he'd had in his ears ever since the disaster. The doctors and the healer had both told him the same thing, that there was a good chance the whining sound would stop on its own, but it might not. The console had been given to him at the House of Healing, right after his broken arm and wrist were mended. He was supposed to play with it often. Something about maintaining dexterity in a healing limb. But he'd mostly been using it to distract himself from everything else. It worked. Sometimes. But not as well here in the children's hospital he'd been transferred to a few days ago. The House of Healing was soothing in a way a mundane hospital never could be. Here, now, everything Alden saw reminded him that things were wrong and they would never be right again. And he was a source of gossip for some of the staff. He knew it because he'd heard a couple of them talking just outside his room when they thought he was asleep. Poor thing lost his parents in such a horrible way. And they still haven't managed to reach any other family. Do you know if he saw it happen? God, I can't imagine the trauma. It wasn't like it was mean gossip. They all felt sorry for him. They all meant well. But Alden hated it. And nobody would tell him the truth about what had happened. Not the whole truth. Not even the grief counselor who spent so much time talking about being honest and open with your feelings. His home had been destroyed, and his parents had died in a supervillain attack. The heroes hired by the city of Chicago had not been able to bring the villain under control without collateral damage. Alden didn't know what that meant. How had they died? Why couldn't he see their bodies? Which supervillain was it? Why? Why had they wanted to hurt Alden's parents? If one more adult told him that it was all a terrible accident, one that was impossible for someone his age to understand, he was going to throw his console at their lying smile. Just as he thought that, Nurse Amanda knocked once and then came straight in. At least she wasn't smiling. In fact, she was wearing a worried frown. "Alden, sweetie," she said. "Someone has come to visit you. Now, you don't have to see her if you don't want to." "Who is it?" he asked quickly. Alden had seen a few different visitors. His teacher had visited him 3 times, and she'd brought handmade "Get Well Soon" cards from the entire 3rd grade. A couple of the nurses from the House of Healing had come as well. And the children's choir director from his father's old church had driven overnight all the way from Nashville with a tray of cupcakes and cheese straws. Visitors were good. Visitors filled the room with noise so that Alden didn't have to hear his own thoughts. "It's Hannah Elber, sweetie. The superhero." Alden froze, his mind flickering automatically to his dark, ruined bedroom. To flashing lights and a body, the body of the villain, lying there torn open. The memory had a foreign feel to it, like it belonged to someone else. But at the same time it was too detailed and clear. He hadn't seen Hannah or Arjun since the day it happened. He'd been in the bubble, covered by the blanket, for what felt like a long time. When the comforter was removed, he and Hannah had been alone together in the back of a van. She'd written him lots of notes, explaining what was going on and what was happening. "You were injured, but you will be all right. My spell is keeping you safe and calm. We are going to the House of Healing. They will help you. IT will not hurt. I will stay with you until you fall asleep." Where are my parents? Alden had thought, over and over again, willing the question to get through. Where are they? Did you rescue them, too? Now, of course, he knew that she hadn't. You don't have to see her, Nurse Amanda said again, seeming to mistake his silence for fear. Just because she is a superhero doesn't mean she gets to do whatever she likes. I'll tell her I want to see her. Alden cried, nearly falling out of the bed in his eagerness. His stomach muscles complained a little, but they were nearly healed now and he barely noticed. Hannah would know things. Maybe she would explain why everything had gone wrong. Where is she? The nurse stared at him. She's downstairs at the check-in desk. Give me a minute, sweetie. She'll come to you. Pound sign, pound sign, pound sign. Oh, man, Hannah Elber muttered, staring at her reflection in the polished metal of the elevator door. I don't think they're going to let me in, Clee. I'm gonna have to go rogue and climb up the side of the building or something. That'll be a great look on the 6 o'clock news, her friend said dryly through her bud. And I'd like to see you try it. You failed hard on the rock wall every time in gym class. I should have come sooner, Hannah said, ignoring the jab. But I was waiting for them to find the kid's aunt so I could talk to her and get permission, only it's starting to seem like they're never going to track the lady down, which just makes everything so much worse. Hannah, it's not your fault his parents died. It is. It's really not. Shut up about it. No. You had to stabilize a building. In a crazy situation, fighting against a veil with weirdest powers. You aren't perfect. You did your best. Arjun did his best. It wasn't quite enough. Mistakes happen to all of us at some point in our careers. That's all there is to it. For a moment, they both fell quiet. Is he? Clee hesitated. Is he going to be all right? Hannah closed her eyes. You should have seen his face, Clee. Killing a civilian has always been his biggest fear, and the way he had to take the villain down this time. He'll never trust me to do my job again, and why should he? Hannah, nobody blames you. Not even Arjun. Hannah shook her head. I promised him, she said quietly. I told him I had his back. I told him he could go all out. That's our whole reason for teaming up. It's the whole reason we're here in Chicago, where they had space for a pair instead of somewhere else. And I dash behind her. The woman at the check-in desk cleared her throat. You can head on up, Ms. Elber. He's in room 3703. Hannah spun around and gave the other woman a bright smile. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Wow, you really go all in on the public persona thing, Clee muttered through the earbud. It's an important part of the job. And it's the least I can do to get that much right. Pound sign, pound sign, pound sign. Alden was by himself when the superhero arrived. It had taken actual begging to get the nurse to leave him alone with his visitor, but she finally relented. He could still hear her murmuring rules and warnings to Hannah through the door, though. His heart was racing. Excitement. Nerves. A little bit of fear. He had only met a hero once before the accident. It was in first grade. The school had held a special assembly, and a hero named Electric Yo-Yo had come to talk to them all about staying safe during emergencies. Heroes are helpers, just like firemen and police officers, Yo-Yo had said, flinging a little orb of green lightning around the stage and calling it back to him like it was a pet. Our powers might look scary, but that doesn't mean we'll hurt you. If one of us gives you instructions, be sure to follow them so that we can keep you safe. Yo-Yo had been funny. He had given out pencils and stickers. Alden couldn't imagine him tearing someone in half. Finally, Hannah stepped through the door, interrupting his thoughts. She had a nervous smile on her face. Her hands were in the pockets of her motorcycle jacket, which just looked like normal clothes right now without the sparkle of magic coating it. Her brown hair was pulled back into 2 French braids. Hi, Alden. She said. I just came by to check on you. Is that okay? She didn't come an inch closer until he nodded. When he did, she walked over to the chair beside his bed and sat down. The vinyl creaked under her weight. They stared at each other for a minute, neither of them blinking. Then Hannah licked her lips and said, Sue, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Hannah. Hannah Elber. My friend and I remember, Alden said quickly. How could I forget? Oh. Good. I thought maybe you wouldn't because of the spell. You were awake inside of it, which was pretty unusual. How are you feeling? Did they get you all patched up? I'm okay. My ears make a lot of noise. They have to keep me here until they are sure my stomach is better. Right. You got stabbed by a big hunk of metal. It flew in right through your window. That had to hurt. I'm so sorry about that. It had hurt. He remembered being in agony before he was in the bubble. But that memory was like the rest of the night. It was clear, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. I never got to see it, he said. What? The piece of metal I got stabbed with. I never got to see it. I didn't think to ask until they brought me here, and nobody knows where it went. Hannah had a weird look on her face for a second, but then she nodded. Yeah. I get that. I'd want to see the thing, too. They probably disposed of it, though. I don't think they can keep bloody chunks of shrapnel lying around at the House of Healing. But I can ask just to be sure if you want me to? Alden nodded. He was relieved that talking to Hannah was so easy. She wasn't treating him like a baby. Ask if I can have it. Will do, Hannah said, giving him a salute. And if you're curious about what it was, I got a good look at it. I'm almost positive it was a piece of a table saw blade. A saw. She made a vaguely triangular shape with her fingers. You had a piece of it this big in your side. Alden pondered that. Then he asked, do you want to see my scar? What? From the table saw. Do you want to see my scar? It's purple. Hannah blinked. Then she smiled. Do I ever? Alden nodded. The doctors and nurses had all told him the scar was cool. It was good to have confirmation from a superhero. He pulled up his hospital-issued pajama shirt to reveal the long, raised scar on his left side. It was dark purple, and it went down at a slight angle from his lower ribs. Hannah made a big deal over it, too. Interesting scars are like collector's items for supers, she told him. That one's great. It doesn't hurt much anymore. I'm glad, said Hannah. They had a real healer patch you up since it was a superpower-related incident. You'd normally be out of the hospital already, but a healed body can suddenly revert. It's incredibly rare, but since you had a strange reaction to my bubble of patient waiting there being extra cautious with you. The silver bubble spell? Hannah nodded. I'm sorry, she said. Normally, if I put a living being inside it, they lose awareness. If I'd realized you were awakened there, I wouldn't have let you see that. Alden felt his face fall. All right. I had important questions to ask her. And she might not stay long. Was that the villain who killed my parents? He asked. The guy who was on my floor. Yeah, said Hannah, sitting up straight and clasping her hands together on top of her knees. Yeah, that was the bad guy. Didn't anyone talk to you about him? Alden flopped back onto his pillows. He gripped the blanket tightly. No. Nobody answers my questions with actual answers. They just say nice-sounding words that don't mean anything. He heard Hannah take a deep breath. After a beat, she said, well, that's not fair to you, but maybe they just don't know enough to tell you everything. I'm not sure how much information regular people actually have right now. Probably a lot of gossip and only a little bit of truth. Do you? I can answer questions if you want. It doesn't have to be today. We can wait until you're out of the hospital, or, why did the villain kill my parents? Alden asked immediately, twisting the blankets in his hands. Was he trying to rob us? Or was he mad at them? Why? He had wondered and wondered. Maybe if there was a reason for the terrible thing that had happened, it would all start to make sense. Hannah gulped. Well, he was a U-class. Do you know what that means? Unique. A couple of Alden's favorite heroes had unique classes. They weren't necessarily stronger than other heroes, but they had unusual powers that didn't fit into the normal set of classes people were granted when they were chosen by the Artonan system. Right. He'd just been called by the system a few months ago, from what we understand. And he got his unique class and his first skills. Instead of registering and coming to live on Anzidor Island or in another hero zone like he was supposed to, He started using his power on civilians. It was an unexpectedly familiar story to Alden. In movies and television shows, the supervillain was almost always someone who refused to register their power and abide by the law. He hadn't realized it was something that could happen in real life. Hannah sighed. He had a power that's never been recorded before. And it was really strong and deadly. What power? It's pretty scary. Are you sure you want to know the details? Alden nodded. Okay, the superhero said. It was some kind of transferability. It took strength and vitality, maybe other things, too, from his targets and transferred them to him. So the more people he hurt, the more powerful he became. They were having an early Halloween party at a club a few blocks away from your apartment building. He went there and started draining people. It took a really long time for people at the party to notice. It was loud and crowded. He blended in, and he killed several people before someone finally realized something was wrong and called emergency services. She shifted in the chair, and it creaked loudly again. The other heroes working here in Chicago were busy, and dispatch didn't realize how dangerous the situation was. So they only sent me and Arjun. When we got to the club, it was bad. The villain's power fed itself. The more people he killed, the more powerful he got. And as he grew stronger, he could kill people even more quickly. He was moving almost like a speed agility type by the time we got there, which was bad for us, because Arjun and I don't have the mental specs to deal with true superspeed. She grew quiet, and when Alden glanced over, he saw that she was staring off into space, her lips pressed together. He didn't want her to stop talking. Not until he knew everything. "What kind of avowed are you?" he asked, feeling a little proud he'd remembered the proper name for people chosen by the system. "What powers do you have?" She shook herself and looked over at him. "I'm an adjuster. A rank. I know that doesn't tell you much because there's a lot of variety with adjusters. I've focused my skills on stabilizing and freezing isolated patches of reality." Seeing his blank expression, she gave him an apologetic shrug. "Yeah, it's kind of a complicated one. Just think of the bubble you were in. I received that spell recently. It makes a space that keeps everything inside it from changing. I don't think it actually stops time. Can't get a straight answer out of anyone I've asked. But it's almost like that. So even though you were badly injured, when I wrapped the bubble around you, you stopped bleeding. Your mind was supposed to stop working, too, but magic can be weird sometimes." "Nothing hurt anymore," said Alden. "I couldn't move. And I couldn't get excited or scared like normal. I'm glad. I'm going to study the spell more so I can figure out exactly what happened. I thought you might be terrified to be trapped in there." It had never occurred to Alden before that a superhero might not understand their own powers. How could you do magic without knowing how it worked? "Anyway," said Hannah, "we had to stop Body Drainer, that's what they're calling him right now. We tried to slow him down with my spells so that Arjun could grab him. Arjun is an S-rank brute, almost purely focused on physical strength. S-ranks have loads of power, so even if the guy started draining him he should have been able to stop him. But I couldn't target or cast fast enough. And none of my spells are invisible, so when I tried to build traps he just dodged them." She sounded frustrated. "He ran out of the club, and we chased him down the street. He was too fast for us, but he kept stopping to attack people, so we managed to keep up. We had to. I told Arjun we had to get him into another enclosed space. One without any people. We would lose him if he ran flat out in an open area, and we couldn't afford that. And usually newbies who aren't used to extreme speed do badly in small spaces. But almost everything was residential. The first empty building we saw was the one right across the street from yours. Alden knew about that. That building was being remodeled. When it was done, it was going to be apartments, too. He'd hoped lots of families with other kids would move in so that they could send secret flashlight messages to each other through the windows at night. We managed to chase the villain in there, Hannah said. Arjun went after him to fight, and I stayed outside to block the exits and stabilize the building so that it wouldn't completely collapse and damage the neighboring structures. It's hard for Arjun to use his full power without destroying everything. I became his sidekick so that he wouldn't have to focus on things like that in the middle of serious fights. So as battlefield support, it was my job to keep bystanders safe and let Arjun know what his options were. She stopped talking again, and her silence lasted for such a long time that Alden began to feel uncomfortable. She's upset. Was it because it went wrong? Something must have gone wrong, because the villain was not dead in the empty building across the street when the fight was over. He was dead in Alden's bedroom. And Alden's parents were dead, too. I was making stable zones where they were needed to absorb the force of Arjun's strikes, but I was spread too thin. And the body drainer started showing off some weird energy skill we still haven't figured out. He was sending out these pulses that were almost like explosions centered on his body. They were going right through my spells. Shrapnel started flying, like that piece of metal that went through your window. She stared at his stomach as if she could see the scar through his shirt, then continued. So I tightened my focus even more, making my spells extra strong in smaller areas so nothing could get through them. And I made a horrible mistake. Arjun suddenly asked through comms if the middle of the exterior wall on the 7th floor could take a big hit, and I said yes. But I was in such a rush I counted the windows wrong. I stabilized the middle of the 8th floor instead, and when he tackled the body drainer, they both smashed through the side of the building, and the momentum carried them all the way across the street into your family's apartment. There were tears in her eyes. The ringing in Alden's ears seemed to have gotten louder all of a sudden. His lips were trembling. "I'm so sorry, Alden," Hannah said. "It was my fault. Don't. You might hear things from others, all kinds of guesses and rumors. But you should know the truth. Arjun was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He did everything right in a bad situation. Your parents died because a teenager thought it would be cool to be a supervillain, and because I made a stupid, awful mistake in the middle of a serious situation." Alden's vision blurred. A huge, racking sob welled up inside of him. He tried to hold it back, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. He started crying, every bit as hard as he had when they first told him his parents were gone. It just wouldn't stop. His body ached with it. His pillow was getting wet. Nurse Amanda burst into the room, and Alden screamed, "Get out! Leave me alone!" So loud it made his throat hurt. Hannah Elber, the superhero, ran from him like he'd attacked her. Nurse Amanda ran toward him, whispering words of comfort. For some reason Alden couldn't understand in the burning pain of the moment, this was exactly the opposite of what he'd wanted. Chapter 3. Time passed. Things changed. Alden's wayward aunt, Connie, was finally located by social services, and the two of them became a family. Their relationship was loving, but far less functional and sheltering than the one he'd had with his parents. Aunt Connie had, as one of Alden's elementary school teachers very kindly put it, an unconventional parenting style. When he was 11, his baseball coach, chewing an enormous wad of gum behind the dugout after a game one day, was less discreet. "Listen, Alden," he said around noisy smacking sounds. "You've got your head straight on your shoulders, so I'll just tell you. It's not right that you have to be the grown-up in the relationship. That woman's got nuts loose in her brain and a bunch of squirrels chasing after them." Alden had frowned and looked down to the place where his shoe was scuffing a small divot into the clay. He didn't like people bad-mouthing his aunt, but it wasn't easy to argue with them. "She'll come pick me up eventually. You don't have to wait with me. Kid, she left you here until after the rec department closed last game. Don't think I didn't hear about it." Alden wondered if he should mention that he'd used his aunt's name and ID number to put an app on his phone so that he could use the adults-only e-scooter rentals around the city when he really needed to. But maybe that would only prove his coach's point. So they waited together, and she did come. Only an hour late that afternoon, with an excuse about traffic and 6 pints of melted ice cream in the back seat of the car. It was fine. They dumped the ice cream and bought more for dinner. Then some of Aunt Connie's friends from the salon where she was working at the moment came over to their house with pizza and beer and loud music. Alden disappeared to his room after the impromptu party became uncomfortably messy. He slapped on his favorite set of headphones and played games on his computer for a while. Then, he did his homework. It was just reading a simplified history of the system's arrival and the ways it had changed Earth. There wasn't much new information in it. The Artonans unleashed the system on Earth, as they had on many other planets in the past. In exchange for powers, arcane knowledge, and tech, humans had to agree to help the Artonans when they were called upon. Plenty of humans took them up on the offer, and the first superhumans were created. That was 70 years ago, in the early 1960s, and almost everyone agreed it had been a good deal for humanity. Without the Artonans, most people thought that Earth might not even have internet or cell phones. And when heroes were summoned by Earth's alien benefactors, the Artonans were fair in their dealings. Sometimes they assigned difficult missions, but they always offered rewards equal to the task given. Alden had already known all of this. At the end of the assignment, his online textbook included a poll for all its readers asking if you'd like to have powers or not. He clicked yes after only a moment's hesitation. "You're in the majority," the screen announced. 96% of the students reading this chapter also said they would like to have powers. You're all super brave. Being a hero is an important job. But did you know that only 0.07% of the people on Earth will be offered access to the Interdimensional Warriors contract? Reminder, that's the proper name for the system. It might show up on a quiz. That's around 7.6 million superhumans. It's a big-sounding number, but it means that more than 10.5 billion people who would like to have superpowers will never even get the chance. That's a lot of disappointed people, Alden thought, feeling more than a little disappointed himself. He answered a few reading comprehension questions, earning a 10/10 and a burst of fireworks across the screen. At midnight, the house was still noisy, so he gave up on the idea of sleeping. He sneaked into the den to grab a cold slice of pizza, then settled back at his desk for his on-again off-again hobby: researching the accident. 3 years dulled things, but on nights like this, he missed his parents acutely. Digging into their deaths was a painful compulsion. Superheroes were a source of fascination for most people, 96% of them apparently, so there was plenty of information. Alden was beginning to learn how to sort fact from fiction. It helped that Hannah hadn't lied to him that day in the hospital. The things she had told him were a guideline that helped him find the other pieces of the story. The pieces that were uglier. For example, there were pictures of some of the body drainer's victims. They looked even more dead than dead bodies usually did. They were twisted up and gruesome. The only photographs of body drainer were nice ones, though, school pictures showing a smiling, pale boy in a shirt and tie. Superhumans usually came into their powers between 15 and 17. He was a senior in high school when he killed 27 people. Most of the deaths happened at the nightclub. But there were a few before that. And 3 while the heroes were in pursuit. There were either none after he was cornered in the building across the street from Alden's bedroom, or 2. It depended on how you looked at it. Some websites counted Alden's parents among body drainer's victims. Others listed them as bystanders. One wrote their names out, Richard and Leah Thorne, and placed them beside the words collateral damage. A couple of superhuman hate sites even listed them as victims of Argent Thomas and Hannah Elber. Like they'd killed them on purpose. You just know heroes do shit like this all the time when they're not on camera, a user named WakeUpTheresBacon said. Easy way to hide a couple of murders. Like oops. It was an accident while I was fighting crime. I've thought about it a lot before. And look at those stupid suckers. They were definitely hero lovers. The lady worked at a house of healing. Alden had seen this comment before several times. He kept coming back to this site to stare at it even though it made him furious. He had gone through phases over the past 3 years where he was angry at the heroes for messing up their fight with the body drainer. But he wasn't currently in one, and he'd never been confused about where the ultimate blame lay. And now he was just. So, So mad at Wake Up Therese Bacon. He knew in his head that it was weird, but he thought he hated Bacon more than he'd ever hated the actual supervillain responsible for ruining his life. He didn't know my parents. He doesn't know anything. How dare he say stuff like that about them? My mom's job was important. Everyone was so proud of her. Houses of healing usually had just one healer, a superhuman or even an Artoman, plus an apprentice or two, and a small handful of regular human nurses who had to go through years of extra training and be granted special authority to use certain healing word chains. His mom being chosen for the job was such a big deal that his family had moved to Chicago for it. She was amazing, but Bacon and his internet friends were acting like she was dumb. He glared at the screen until his eyes started to water. He wanted to tell everyone that Bacon was the stupid one, even though the comment had been posted over a year ago, but the thread was closed. He let his forehead smack into the desk and started a breathing exercise a school counselor had given him not long after his parents died. It had been months since he'd remembered to do it, but at one point, he'd had to use it almost every day. He fell into the rhythm easily. When he felt better, he sat back up and closed the infuriating website. He turned the volume up on his headphones. It was one of his rainstorm playlists. In theory it would help distract him from his lingering tinnitus, but in practice, he mostly used it to drown out Aunt Connie. He typed in the name of another website, one he'd found recently, and read through it again. It was the blog of an elderly man named Marv who was extremely geeky about super abilities. Marv went into minute detail about the physics of them. He discussed the intricacies of the magic chaos dynamic. He hit pages and pages of skill listings and stat theory. And he did breakdowns of the more obscure powers. Alden couldn't understand most of it. But he was trying to understand everything about a post the man had made 3 weeks ago. It was about Body Drainer. And because Drainer had only really made one appearance in the public eye, the entire breakdown of his skills was based on that night. Alden had read it several times, and every time he did, he felt his mind shifting a little. Like it was trying to make room for a different perspective than the one that had been deeply entrenched in him for so long. It wasn't that Marv had much new information to offer about what had happened. He didn't. But the facts he chose to focus on in his discussion of Drainer's powers weren't the facts Alden had always focused on. The Drainer had killed people by draining them. It was right there in the name. But Marv was interested in finding out what exactly it was the villain was draining. To merely say he stole strength from his victims, as most do, is to say we don't know what he was absorbing from those poor souls at all. The implication is that he was somehow increasing his own physical abilities by depriving others of theirs. This is obviously incorrect. It is fascinating to me that so many of my fellow superpower enthusiasts have ignored the most unusual aspect of the Body Drainer's case, his use, in his final moments, of what official reports call only energetic bursts akin to explosions. This is wildly different from his more commonly discussed talent for enhancing his speed. If the villain was only improving his own physical traits as he stole life from others, there would be no way to produce energetic bursts. And the suggestion that he had acquired an additional high-ranked skill from the system beyond the drain ability beggars belief. May I remind my friends that this particular villain had only become a superhuman a few weeks previously? Skills of enormous power are not so easy to come by. Any attempt to ascertain the true nature of Body Drainer's deadly skill must begin with a thorough pondering of these strange explosions. Here we head into the thorny jungle of Magi Chaos, where one human might lay hands on another and take from them something more essential than muscle or bone. Alden read the introduction slowly. Then he read the rest of the post even more slowly. Marv grew more long-winded rather than less as the writing progressed. But the focus on Body Drainer's explosive ability was particularly important to Alden, so he persevered. Marv reported that Drainer had used the explosions twice in rapid succession. Boom. Boom. Only a second apart. And then a third time, approximately 90 seconds later, as reported by Heroes on Scene, at the moment of impact by Mr. Argent Thomas, a strength-focused brute class. Boom. Marv was curious about how Drainer's power caused the explosions in the first place. Alden was more bitterly focused on the timing of them. Was it really 90 seconds between the first two and the third? 90 seconds between the explosions that had thrown him from his bed in the moment Arjun and the villain crashed through the walls of his room and he lost consciousness. It wasn't the first time he'd asked himself that since reading the post. He glanced over at Wummy, sitting on the foot of his neatly made bed beside his backpack. But the smiling wombat had no answers. Alden closed his eyes and tried to remember. There was the sudden shock of waking up in pain on the floor. His ears were ringing. He screamed for his parents. He realized his mouth was full of blood. His arm was messed up. He'd been pierced by the shrapnel. He screamed again. He saw broken glass. He reached for Wummy. There was wind in the room. The world exploded. It could have been 90 seconds, he thought. Isn't that a long time? Alden felt his perception shifting again. He decided that he had to know. He shut down his computer and turned off his lights. He grabbed his phone and climbed into bed. This is so mean. And embarrassing. He found the phone's stopwatch feature and let his thumb hover over the start/stop button. Carefully hiding the phone in his hand under his sheets, he took a deep breath and pressed the button. The instant he felt a haptic twitch from the phone, he screamed at the top of his lungs. Aunt Connie. 1 Mississippi, he thought. 2 Mississippi. Help. He screamed. Aunt Connie. Aunt Con, there was a sound like an elephant barging through the den. A crash. Swearing from one of the guests. Something like a pizza box hitting the floor. Then Alden's aunt burst into his room. Her bleached hair was wild around her face. She'd flung the door open so hard it ricocheted off the wall. Her eyes were wide. Alden. She shouted, leaping over his backpack to grab him. Alden, baby? What's wrong? So forceful was the response that he almost forgot to hit the stopwatch's button. Maybe I didn't have to scream quite that loud. I think I had a bad dream. Jose and Rhonda from the salon were both staring at him through the bedroom door. He felt his face heat. His aunt rocked back and forth, still clutching him to her. It's all right, she murmured. It's all right. I've got you. Hidden under the sheets, the clock had stopped at 8 seconds. £. It took a long while for Alden to convince his aunt he was fine. And that he didn't need her to sleep with him and scare the monsters away like he was a little kid. He must not have done a great job of it, though. When the bus dropped him off after school the next day, he found that his room smelled like someone had dumped a truckload of apple pie filling into it. He looked around and found the culprit quickly. It was a Christmas-themed fragrance dispenser, plugged into the wall and glowing hot pink. I guess she wanted me to have a nightlight. He wrinkled his nose but left it plugged in to punish himself for scaring her and lying about why. He dropped off his bag and headed to the kitchen. He had a couple of hours of privacy at least. He opened a pair of overstuffed drawers Aunt Connie called the flat stuff place. The drawers were, indeed, full of flat stuff. Takeout menus, recipes, random tarot cards, matchbooks, I voted stickers, old credit cards, brochures, birthday cards, random school assignments, and more. Alden dug through it all, looking for something he had seen in one of the drawers before. It had been a long time ago, but that didn't matter. The flat stuff never got cleaned out. It only accumulated endlessly. It took him almost 20 minutes, but he finally found it. It was a burgundy pamphlet describing the benefits of the dully named Anzidora Compassion Fund. It was a fund to take care of people who'd been injured during superhuman incidents. Alden opened it up to find a bullet point list of benefits, some he'd received himself. Trauma counseling. The Saurian Orphan Now scholarship money. There was even an annual Victims of Villains retreat at a campground in New England. He couldn't imagine a worse vacation, so he had refused when Aunt Connie suggested they should apply for it. Alden wasn't interested in the pamphlet itself, but in the scrap of paper that was tucked inside it. There was a phone number and a message, "Call me if you or Alden ever need anything." He Chapter 4 Avowed Communications. Alden stared at the note for a while. He hadn't seen Hannah since that day at the hospital, but obviously, she had reached out to his aunt at some point. Maybe right after the accident, since this message had been buried in the flat stuff place for so long. He had gotten a video call from Argent Thomas once, several months after it happened. It had taken place in his therapist's office. The hero was polite, but the whole thing was extremely awkward. By that time, Alden had cobbled together enough of the details to understand that during the last few seconds of the fight, Body Drainer had run toward his unconscious body in a desperate attempt to drain Alden and re-up his own power. Mr. Thomas had grabbed the teenage villain and done what someone with incredible super strength did. I should have thanked him for saving my life. It was a new thought. Alden had long been aware that Arjun and Hannah had technically saved his life. Twice. Once by stopping Drainer and then again when Hannah put him inside her magic bubble to keep him from bleeding out. But any gratitude he felt had always been overshadowed by the death of his parents. Now though, he took a deep breath and dialed the strangely long number. The words he'd been refining all day during school were on the tip of his tongue. As soon as Hannah answered, he would say them, get his final answer, and then hang up. That would be that. The phone rang once and then immediately connected. "This is Alden Thorne," he said in a rush. "Hello, Earthling," said a cheery, canned voice with an unfamiliar accent. "You've dialed into your planet's avowed communications network. Your number isn't registered. Please state your name, reason for calling, and level of urgency. Prank calls will be penalized." Alden blinked. "Am I talking to the Artonan system right now? The actual system?" He had to be. It was calling him Earthling. He hadn't realized that a reality-altering magical interface could even have a phone number. And his brain was so set on delivering his message to Hannah quickly and with a minimum of social discomfort that he had to think for a beat before he could answer the unexpected, but perfectly simple, questions. This is Alden. Samuel Alden Thorne. I'm calling to talk to Hannah Elber. She's a super, one of the avowed. It's not urgent, so I guess my urgency level is low?" There was no pause after he finished talking. The system replied immediately. "Oh, yes," it said, in a pleasant voice that no longer sounded pre-recorded at all. "I see you, Alden. Hannah has listed you as a priority contact. She's not on a quest right now, so I'll patch you through to her. Would you prefer video, audio only, or empathetic telepathy?" "Empathetic telepathy?" Alden asked, startled. Telepathy was a superpower, wasn't it? Not something you just used for phone calls. "I don't recommend it," the voice said. "It's damaging for underdeveloped minds, and Hannah can only afford to pay for 4.68 minutes worth. Your call would have to be brief." "Why is it even an option, then?" Alden held the phone farther from his ear, as if that would mitigate any potential brain damage. Audio only is fine. Forwarding you now. #####. You're the most boring person in the world. I hope you know that." Hannah looked up in surprise to see her best friend standing over her. Clee was carrying a pair of plum juice mocktails, and her brown eyes were narrowed in disappointment. "Are you seriously working during my super extraordinary going-away brunch time extravaganza?" "Ah," said Hannah, setting aside her notebook and gazing around at the restaurant. "Isn't the party kind of over?" Clee had finally gotten her first off-island job offer, a coveted posting in Toronto. She'd be starting in a couple of weeks, and she had booked her favorite Sichuan place for the entire morning so that all of their friends could farewell her. It was the first time Hannah had ever had extra spicy mapo tofu for breakfast, but she had to admit it was pretty awesome. Now, though, the buffet was empty and just a few people were left sitting at tables piled high with dirty dishes. In one corner, a shaper who Hannah only vaguely recognized seemed to be practicing his skills by making the dregs of green tea from his cup float around in lazy circles over his table. "The party is never over while I'm here," Clee proclaimed, lifting the drinks over her head. Some plum juice spilled onto her sleek black bun, and she completely ignored it. A few people raised their glasses toward her and cheered good-naturedly. "I really am going to miss you," Hannah said with a smile. "I hope Toronto is a blast." "You could always be my sidekick," Clee said hopefully. She leaned over the table, a familiar pleading expression on her face. I know we could make it work. I'd split my salary with you 60/40ths. Canada would get 2 for the price of 1. They'd love it. It would be fun, but you know I want to maximize a partner's effectiveness. I know. Oh. But why don't you try to maximize me? I wanna be maximized. It would be cool. You're a long-range mind sniper who turns a target's brain into custard. You're already 100% effective as long as you don't miss. How am I supposed to maximize that? Actually, Hannah had made a couple of plans for how to support Clee's skills as a sway, just in case a need ever arose. But it didn't change the fact that, in most circumstances, the two of them working together would be just the same as any two powerful heroes working in parallel. The goal of a battlefield support, the goal Hannah was aiming for anyway, was to make a partner exponentially more effective than they would be without her. Right now she was writing a team-up proposal for a fellow adjuster currently stationed in Jakarta. He was an older, more experienced hero who did some extremely creative things with localized temperature shifts. He'd had a dedicated support briefly a few years before, and his mission success rate had shot through the roof, but the sidekick had gotten a quest summons and never returned to Earth. Possibly he was just busy with whatever task he'd been set by the space wizards, but at this point, it was better to presume he was dead. "I'll take this," Clee said, placing a mocktail on the table and snatching the notebook. "You take the drink. We've still got an hour on our booking for this place. Let's play poker." Amused, Hannah agreed, and before long they were playing midday poker with the other leftovers from the party. The shaper was a minor leaguer named David. Poor guy was getting fleeced because he hadn't realized that their friend Nure had a permanently engaged passive skill that heightened attraction. Nure's fiancée, Ilya, was grinning behind his handful of cards. He had insane dexterity stats, so he was probably cheating, too. But none of them would ever catch him at it. "I still can't believe they're letting an S-ranked sway off the island," Ilya said, shaking his head as Clee excitedly revealed a winning hand. "I thought for sure you were stuck here until you were old and gray. I've been pure of heart and even purer of deed since I was 15, Clee said, smiling broadly. "My record's so lily-white my own mother's criticisms bounce off of it. I am saint. An angel. An absolute lamb. An unholy terror that could kill us all without getting up from your seat," Nure said, stealing a maraschino cherry from Ilya's glass. Clee shook her head. "Realistically, I could only kill one of you at this range. Then, the others would stab me to death with forks and chopsticks." "We should do that," said Ilya. "I haven't had a mission bonus in ages." Hannah smiled at the banter. It really was amazing that Clee had gotten the Toronto job. Most countries weren't okay with the idea of mind controllers crossing their borders. The majority of sways, the ones who didn't become villains, spent their lives on the island or in one of a few other zones owned by the allied heroes of Earth. Clee's parents were superhumans, too, so from the moment she'd gotten her class she'd understood the stakes. Perfection was the minimum requirement if she wanted to work internationally as a hero. She had taken it a step farther by specializing at every turn until she was finally categorized as a mind sniper instead of a manipulator. She had no subtle tweaks in her repertoire, just powerful single-target mind destruction. Very scary, but not in the way that made people in power want to keep her on the opposite side of the planet. It was a big gamble on her part to narrow her focus so heavily. Hannah was glad it had finally paid off. "You know, maybe before you head to Toronto you should." "Oh, wait. Got a call." A visual notification blinked in her peripheral vision, and she reached up to swipe at it. She had never bothered to train herself out of the habit of prodding around in thin air. Controlling your thoughts to give perfectly accurate mental commands to the system interface really wasn't as easy as just using your fingers. The blinking call notice was gold, the color she'd assigned to highest priority, so she didn't even bother to check the identity. Clee was sitting across the table from her, and she didn't currently have a partner. So that meant it could only be her mother. "Hi, Mum," she said. "What's up? It's the middle of the night in London, isn't it?" There was complete silence for a few beats. said an uncertain voice. "This is Alden Thorne. Is this Miss Elber?" Hannah dropped her playing cards. "Hannah, you all right?" Clee said, frowning. She shook her head frantically. "This is Hannah." Her voice came out in a squeak, so she cleared her throat. "It's great to hear from you, Alden. What can I do for you?" "Oh shit," Clee mouthed. She made dramatic shushing motions at the rest of the table, even though it was unnecessary. The system wasn't going to transfer their words through a call directed to Hannah. "Okay," said Alden. There was the sound of sharply indrawn breath, and then, in a fast monotone, like he was trying to get through a particularly unpleasant reading assignment, he said, "I would like to ask you if it was really 90 seconds between Body Drainer's first 2 uses of his energy explosion skill and the moment when Mr. Thomas tackled him." Hannah opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, he continued. "Because that's what I read online. That he used it for the first time, twice really fast, and then he used it again 90 seconds later when he and Mr. Thomas came through the side of the building. Is that true? Was it 90 whole seconds? What is this?" Hannah still hadn't put the disastrous Chicago mission behind her. She probably never would. But she'd also thought she was done with most of the fallout from it. She'd never expected to hear from Alden again. "I didn't have a timer that night. But when we filed our reports, Arjun and I both agreed it was around 90 seconds. It could have been a little less. Am I saying the right thing? He's what? 11 now? It's important to say the right thing." Hannah's head was a mess. She'd wondered about the boy over and over, but it wasn't appropriate for her to bother him or his aunt just to assuage her own lingering guilt. What did he want? What was this 90 seconds business? What if he asked for more details about the villain? What was she even allowed to tell civilians about that case? It had been a while since she'd checked to see which things she knew were considered sensitive, and which were public information. "Okay," said Alden. "Thank you. Bye." "Wait, that's it?" Bye-bye." The kid had already hung up. Hannah slumped down in her chair and put a hand to the front of her t-shirt. Shit. Her heart was racing like she'd just done a post-stat increase sprint test. "You alright?" Clay asked, raising an eyebrow at her. "Yeah." That was unexpected. He just wanted to know. The call notice flashed again. She could have used a few seconds to collect her thoughts, but her trader hand clicked on it immediately. "I forgot some of what I wanted to say." Alden's speech was still rapid-fire, but it was slightly less monotone. "Hit me with it," Hannah said without pause. "Because her mouth was a traitor, too. It wasn't your fault my parents died. I've been doing a lot of research on you and Mr. Thomas and Body Drainer, and your power can't prevent explosions unless you know when and where the explosion is coming from. And you didn't even know Body Drainer could make an energy burst because he only did it for the first time during that fight. The official report says my parents died when Mr. Thomas came through the wall and part of our building collapsed. Their bedroom was buried under stuff from the floor above and the roof. But I think they were already dead by then. From the first set of explosions. Because they didn't hear me yelling for them." He paused for a quick inhale, then dove right back in. "I was screaming really loud when I woke up, but my mom and dad never came. They didn't even yell back to me. And if it was 90 seconds, they would have. I tested it on my Aunt Connie, and she came running in 8 seconds. So they must have already been gone when you messed up and let Mr. Thomas and Drainer crash through the side of our building." Alden fell silent. Hannah's hand was clenching the front of her shirt. She was trying to think of what she should say. "Thank you. That didn't seem right. Let me fact-check this information and get back to you to confirm. That definitely wasn't it. Kid, are you okay?" "Better. But still not great." Apparently she'd waited too long. Because the boy spoke again, in a slower, more pointed tone. Like he was trying to explain something to a younger child. "I'm telling you they died in the first explosion. The one you couldn't have done anything about anyway. Because you didn't know it was coming. So you don't have to feel bad about it. Okay?" "Okay," said Hannah. "Thank you so much for letting me know. I don't have Mr. Thomas's number, so can you tell him, too? Okay. I'll call him right away, she said mechanically. Hannah, you idiot. Be a hero. The 11-year-old victim is being the mature, thoughtful one here. Do better. Think of something. You're going to feel like an ass if you don't say something comforting. By them, the boy said. Alden, wait. Hannah's mind was still completely blank. She scrambled for an idea, and blurted out the first one that popped into her head. Do you want to come to Onzidora sometime? I could get you a day pass. She winced at herself. Those were totally for special circumstances and bigwigs and immediate family. But she could do it. Probably. The boy seemed to be considering the offer. During summer break? He suggested. Would it be expensive to fly there? All right. Travel to Point Nemo wasn't exactly simple. I'll get a teleport for you. The system can do that. You just let me know when you can come. I'll ask my aunt if she minds, he said. But she won't. Great. See you this summer then. She'd have a while to. Break starts in 3 weeks. Shit. Northern Hemisphere. Cool. She said, finally managing to summon up her hero Hannah voice. Let me know what your aunt says. We'll make it happen. She'll say yes. Bye. He hung up again. Hannah rubbed a hand down her face. I think that went okay. She'd always wanted to do something for the kid, and it just hadn't been an option. A hero couldn't go inserting herself into a victim's life. But since he'd called himself, I need to check on the kiss's facts again. Maybe call Arjun. He might answer after all this time. So, Hannah? She looked up and saw Lee watching her over the top of his hand of cards. Are you secretly dating a rabbit? What? No. You know I'm single right now, she said absently. She was racking her brain, trying to think of which friends she could call to get a travel pass on short notice. I dated a rabbit once, Davis said dreamily. She was so rich. But she would get yanked away by summons at the most awkward moments. That's why she was rich, Murray pointed out. She was one of the lucky ones. Rabbits who never get summoned have zero skills and zero money. And that's most of them. It's a rough gig. Hannah, Clee said slowly, I think what our friends are trying to point out in a stupidly roundabout way is that you just offered to purchase a custom teleport for a civilian kid. We can do that, can't we? Hannah said anxiously, still flipping through contacts on her system screen. I know I've heard of people doing it. Yeah, but have you ever priced one? No, Hannah said. She'd never needed to. Teleport was covered by the island government for official travel, and superhumans didn't really get the opportunity to do a lot of unofficial traveling. Why? Is it bad? Everyone else at the table exchanged glances. Clee sighed. We'll start a fundraiser for you or something. It's a good cause. In the meantime, you should eat mostly ramen and beans. Chapter 5 5 years later. As cold as tits, Jeremy Levi muttered, rubbing his bare biceps with his hands as he stared out at the snow falling over the Les tracks. Alden, man, stop looking so warm. You've got a sweater and a coat. It's not fair. His pale lips were almost as gray as the sky overhead, and his breath came out in frosty white puffs of fog. Agree to stupid dares, win stupid prizes. Alden leaned against a railing while they waited for the train. It's 20-something degrees. Did you seriously think you were stronger than frostbite? I thought it'd be okay. The chatter in Jeremy's teeth was probably only half drama. They'd left his place 15 minutes ago, and Jeremy was wearing flip-flops, shorts, and a sleeveless white tee with a picture of a dancing traffic cone on it. Are toots particularly cold? Bo, the third member of their friend group, asked. He sounded amused. And since when do we use that metaphor anyway? It's a weird one. Bo looked shy and nerdy with his horn rims, grandmotherly scarf, and horrible bowl haircut. But he had a nasty grin on his face as he took in the other boy's suffering. I'll loan you my scarf, Remy, he cooed. Just beg. And no, you bastard. You're gonna give me the $10 when this is over. And then I'm gonna shove it up your... It's a reference to witches. Alden stuffed his hands into the pockets of his jeans as the train approached the platform. What? The saying. It's about witches, I think. Some superstition from a long time ago, maybe. Huh. Jeremy exhaled another cloud of fog. Bet those Salem goons would have had heart attacks if they could see us all now. We're on our way to alien school. You have a snack for a demon in your messenger bag, and Bo's got a Bedlam Beldam poster taped to the wall over his bed. He's not really a demon, said Alden, stepping into the least crowded car. He's just a weird-looking extra-dimensional being who has to do community service for all eternity. Because he attempted to murder. That's better? Would you rather have someone attempt to murder you or succeed? I bought that poster when I was 8, Bo interrupted, turning his nose up at Jeremy. Everyone loves Bedlam Beldam when they're 8. Yeah, but you're 16 now, bro. That's a long time to stare at a superhero whose whole thing is talking to cats and wearing pointy hats. They took their seats, and while his friends argued about the merits of witch-themed heroes, Alden pulled out his phone. He did it almost without thinking about it. I shouldn't do this again. It'll only make me gloomy for the rest of the morning. But he didn't put the phone up. Instead, he tapped on the gleaming silver sigil that had appeared after he called Hannah for the first time. It looked like an app, but it definitely wasn't. The thing was impossible to delete and appeared on any phone Alden held, including a vintage rotary dial he'd once encountered at a neighbor's house. It was kind of creepy, but at least he wasn't alone. Anyone who had permission to call a superhero through the system apparently had the same bizarre perk. He held the phone to his ear. "Play last 3 voicemails," he muttered. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and Alden stared at his own distorted reflection in the metal pole beside his seat. He looked a lot like his father, green eyes, hair hovering between true brown and auburn, average height for his age. His freckles had mostly disappeared for now, but they'd be back in summer. A familiar, bright voice interrupted his inspection. "Hey, Alden. It's Hannah." Alden closed his eyes. He could picture the hero's smile. She was always unyieldingly perky when she spoke to him, whether it was during their few in-person meetups or over the phone. He didn't know if it was her natural personality or something she made an effort at. "Listen, I just got a summons a few minutes ago. The real deal. It's only my 4th one ever. Pretty cool, right? Anyway, I have to go, so I might need to reschedule our annual visit. Wanted you to know so that you don't freak if the teleport notification doesn't come through for you in a couple of days like we planned. We'll hang out when I get back. There's this awesome new ice park on the island. Let's check it out together. See you soon." There was a trail of sound. Alden's grip tightened on the phone as the next message started to play. "Alden, this is Hannah's friend Clee. We met once before. Everything's fine, I just wanted you to know that Hannah's still off on her quest. We expect her back any day now." Another trill, and then the latest one. He had received it a couple of weeks ago, and even though he listened to it dozens of times, he still felt his pulse pick up. "Hello, Alden. It's Clee again. I know we talked about the possibility of this when I reached out to you a couple of months ago, but if Hannah's not back soon, there's going to be a funeral. February 13th. Her birthday. Like I said last time, it's extremely rare for the summons to last longer than a few weeks. And since it's been half a year, her friends, we think it would be best to finally have some closure. For her mother at least. Let me know if I can order a teleport for you, okay? I know Hannah would appreciate you being there." There was a pause. "Would you like to listen again?" the system said in the canned version of its voice. Alden shut it off. Outside the window, buildings raced past. They weren't far from his old neighborhood. The apartment building was still an apartment building. The nightclub where Body Drainer had murdered so many people was still a nightclub. Everything was repaired. Like new. There were no scars left. Not where they could be seen anyway. The city had long since moved on to new worries about new villains. Just last night, There had been footage on the news of one of the city's current heroes in residence engaged in an unusual high-speed pursuit that started on North Avenue Beach. Some villain with earth-shaping powers had apparently been constructing a lair under Lake Michigan for the past few years, and they'd finally found him. Skiff, a popular hero who controlled water, had given chase. It had taken an hour, and he'd flooded the ground floor of a couple of buildings downtown. A sewer had collapsed. Only minor injuries except to the villain, who was in intensive care after being drowned. It was a decent outcome given the powers involved. Skiff seemed like a competent guy. But his smile had been strained on television, and even though they'd spliced the footage to be flattering to him, it was clear he'd been curt in his replies to the interviewer. Alden couldn't help but remember something Hannah had once said. On his first visit to the island, when he was 11, he had taken a notebook full of questions about, well, everything. Poor Hannah must have felt like she was being interrogated by a short, obsessed reporter. They'd talked all about the night his parents had died. Then, they'd branched off into a more general discussion about powers and being a superhero. And she had said something that had stuck with him ever since. In college, which is basically just one long training program here on the island, we had this assignment to come up with our heroic motto. Like a guideline for how we wanted to approach problems. I picked something really basic and cliché, happy to help. But now that I've actually done hero work for a while, I think the motto I would go with is, we could have done that better. Sipping on a strawberry milkshake at the table across from her, Alden had frowned. That's not a good motto, he said seriously. Nobody would like a hero with a motto like that. It's sad. Maybe it is. But I guess it's less of a motto for sharing with the public and more, like, a guideline for myself. When you're dealing with superpowers, there's so much room for error. Things happen faster than your brain can keep up. Physics gets counterintuitive. Or it doesn't apply at all. Some powers, your own and the bad guys, just feel so much bigger than you. She took a French fry from the shared plate between them. It's easy, when the dust settles, to say you did everything you could. It's easy to look away from all the places where you made mistakes, because there are always so many of them. It makes you feel horrible and useless even if you tried your best. But I think I want to be someone who does look, so that I make a few less errors in every battle. And maybe I want to do it so that the heroes I work with don't have to look too closely at it themselves. In a lot of ways, my power is easy to handle, emotionally, compared to something like super strength or mind control. Alden hadn't understood then, and she dodged him when he asked her to clarify. But he'd paid attention in the years since. To the unsaid things behind the publicist-approved articles, to Hannah herself and her unusual dedication to being a support for other superheroes instead of standing in the limelight herself. Skiff is stressed because he had to drown that villain to end things. It was only a guess, but it made sense. The hero had a kind of happy-go-lucky flair. He hosted beach volleyball tournaments and did a lot of charity events with kids. He had a spotless record as far as casualties went. And the villain had gone down in the middle of a street. Not in one of the flooded areas. The situation must have been getting out of hand. Skiff couldn't risk letting someone with a tunneling skill run wild with so many buildings around. He had to hold the guy down and force water into his lungs. He needed a sidekick. Hannah could have done it. Well, that was a bad example. Hannah would have been a perfect matchup for the tunneler. She could have stuffed him into her magic bubble, and there wouldn't have been any need for another hero on the scene at all. But there were tons of ways even a weak sidekick could have helped the superhero out with a case like this one. A buff that boosted Skiff's speed would have let him win the chase before it left his home turf on the lake. Anyone with a ranged attack would have been useful. But sidekicks had gone out of fashion in the 90s. Before then, it was normal for an S-rank or rank superhuman, the usual superhero ranks, to work with an entourage of weak assistants. Teams were all the rage. But that had been a bad decade for villain activity, and people had started calling sidekicks bucket kicks because they died a lot. For a while, sidekicks had a 12% survival rate in superhuman on superhuman battles. It wasn't like they were supposed to be in those battles in the first place. They were supposed to be evacuating civilians and running comms and things like that. But villains didn't adhere to the rules of fair play, and targeting the squishy friends of the more dangerous hero was a pretty good psychological tactic. So sidekicks were out. No city wanted the bloodstains on their image. Weak superhumans stayed on the island or, if they were lucky enough to be good at something flashy, worked in entertainment. And there were just a few active superheroes these days who, like Hannah, deliberately chose skills that would be better for support than outright combat. It was a dangerous choice, to take abilities that wouldn't be as good in a one-on-one fight. But Hannah had been so passionate about it. Battlefield support was supposed to be a multiplier for another hero, she had told Alden. A second fiddle that played like an entire orchestra. Two heroes fighting side by side is great, she'd said. But if one of those heroes is spec'd to complement the other, it's like adding an exponent. You get something way more than the sum of its parts. Suddenly, a flip-flop nudged Alden's shin. His thoughts scattered, and he looked up. "Hey, man, this is our stop," Jeremy nodded toward the doors. "What's up with you? You were totally out of it." "Sorry. Just thinking about that essay assignment we got in lit class." "Ugh, why am I hanging out with you nerds?" Jeremy complained. "We go to school 5 days a week already, and now the two of you have got me going to more school on the weekends." Bo clapped him on the shoulder. "Honestly, neither one of us thought you'd actually apply to consulate classes when we suggested it. You could be doing anything right now, but you're here. I don't know whether I should be touched by your fidelity or saddened by your total lack of other friends." "It's true," Alden agreed, grabbing his bag and standing. "You're way needier than we realized. At this rate, you'll end up an honor student against your will." Jeremy looked appalled. "Alden, you demon-feeding jerk. How dare you? You're supposed to be the nice one." "I am?" Alden asked, genuinely surprised. "I mean, I guess I'm not as mean as Bo. You're just not trying hard enough," Bo said sincerely as they took the stairs down to street level. "Shut up, you two. I'm the funny one. Bo's the mean one. Alden's the nice one. I didn't know you had us all labeled. Can we call me scathing instead of mean? What makes me nice?" Most people who knew Alden would probably describe him as reserved. He thought his social skills were adequate when he called on them, but he wasn't an extrovert. He was overly comfortable doing his own thing, and he made friends mostly by happenstance. Bo had attached himself to Alden in middle school, probably because Alden was the only member of their class he hadn't offended by the end of the first month. And Jeremy had somehow landed in their orbit as a freshman, when he'd realized he wasn't enough of a jock to be one of the jocks in high school. "I'm glad I'm nice, but I don't really think of myself that way. It's the whole superhero thing," Jeremy said, rubbing his arms furiously as they walked. "You act all sensible, and you have a multi-page college plan as a sophomore. But you still really want to be that guy in spandex that rescues kitty cats from trees. Like, I don't know. It's sweet, man." Alden winced. Bo cackled. "Oh my God, Alden, your expression." Then, a confused look crossed his face. "Maybe we should call Jeremy the insightful one? I didn't see that coming." Tope continued. "Thanks for listening.